Okay, so picture this. I was fresh out of college, desperate for a job, any job that would pay the bills. And well, the only place hiring was the local graveyard. Yeah, I know. Sounds cliche, right? Working the night shift amongst the dearly departed. But hey, money's money, and the pay was surprisingly decent. Plus, how much trouble could you really get into in a place where everyone's 6 feet under and not exactly mobile? That was my logic anyway. Turns out I was incredibly, terrifyingly wrong. My first few nights were uneventful, which was a relief, honestly. Just the usual graveyard sounds, the wind whistling through the trees, owls hooting, the occasional distant siren. I'd patrol the grounds, a heavy-duty flashlight my only companion, the beams cutting through the inky blackness, dancing across weathered headstones and silent mausoleums. It was peaceful in a morbid kind of way. Quiet. Too quiet sometimes. You know that feeling. Like the silence isn't just an absence of sound, but something heavy, something waiting. Yeah, I started feeling that pretty quickly. The graveyard itself stretched for miles. It wasn't just a small plot. It was sprawling, rolling hills dotted with ancient oaks and winding paths. There were sections dating back to the 1800s, with crumbling stone markers and angels with broken wings. Those parts were the eeriest, especially when the fog rolled in off the nearby creek, making everything look like some kind of macabre movie set. My job was pretty simple. Lock up the main gates at sunset, patrol the grounds every few hours, and make sure no one was, doing anything they shouldn't be. Vandalism was apparently a thing, which I found pretty messed up. Leave the dead in peace, right? I worked alone, which I initially thought was a perk. No awkward small talk with a coworker. No one to tell me I was jumpy. Just me and the permanent residents. The shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. 8 hours of pure darkness, punctuated only by the glow of my flashlight and the occasional distant streetlight. My routine became pretty ingrained after a week or two. Start at the main office, check the security cameras, which were ancient and mostly useless, honestly, then begin my rounds. I'd walk the perimeter first, checking the fences. Then I'd move into the older sections, doing a grid search, making sure everything was in order. It wasn't until my 3rd week that I started noticing things. Small things at first, things I could dismiss as my imagination running wild in the dark, like a shadow at the edge of my flashlight beam that wasn't there a second ago, or a twig snapping when there was absolutely no wind and nothing visible nearby to cause it. Sounds, mostly. Distant, faint sounds that would disappear the moment I focused on them. I'd stop, hold my breath, my heart pounding in my chest, just listening to the silence. And then nothing, just the wind again. I'd shake my head, tell myself I was being ridiculous. It's a graveyard, late at night. Of course you're going to be a little on edge. Your brain is playing tricks on you. Ghost stories, movies, they all feed into the natural creepiness of the place. Right, that's what I kept telling myself. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew. It was like being watched. A constant, low-level hum of awareness that prickled the back of my neck. I'd be walking along a path, my flashlight swinging in front of me, and I'd get that sudden, overwhelming urge to look over my shoulder. and every time I did, there was nothing there, just darkness and tombstones. Then came the more concrete things. The first time, I was in the Civil War section, the oldest part of the graveyard. The air always felt colder there, heavier. I was checking on a damaged urn, making a note of it for the morning, when I heard it. A light, rhythmic scraping sound, like fingernails on stone. My blood went cold. I froze, listening. The sound was coming from behind a large mausoleum about 50 yards away. It stopped as soon as I went still. I slowly, carefully, turned my flashlight towards the mausoleum. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the intricate stonework, the faded names etched into the front. Nothing. No one. The scraping sound was gone. I stood there for a tense moment, straining to hear anything over the pounding of my own heart. Had I imagined it, the wind? Could it have been a branch scraping against the mausoleum? It didn't sound like a branch. It sounded deliberate. I edged closer, my footsteps echoing on the gravel path. I kept my flashlight trained on the mausoleum, searching every nook and cranny. Nothing. But as I rounded the back, I saw it. Fresh scratch marks on the stone. They weren't deep, but they were definitely new. And they weren't random. They looked like symbols, or maybe letters. I couldn't tell in the dim light, distorted by the beam of my flashlight. A shiver went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the mausoleum. My mind was racing. Who would do that? Vandalism, maybe. But why scratch random symbols? And why stop the moment I heard them? I finished my patrol in that section much faster than usual. Every shadow seemed to lengthen and twist into something menacing. Every gust of wind sounded like a whispered word. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. But there was never anything, just the silent, unmoving tombstones. I went back to the office when my patrol was done. The image of those scratch marks burned into my mind. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a local kid messing around, trying to scare the new night watchman. That made a kind of twisted sense, didn't it? It had to be that. Anything but something else. I didn't report it. What would I say? I heard scratching noises and saw some marks on a mausoleum. My boss would think I was nuts, or just trying to get out of my job. The next few nights were worse. Much worse. The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just a feeling anymore, it felt almost palpable. Like someone was breathing down my neck. I'd be walking, and I'd suddenly just no asterisk someone was behind me. I'd spin around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but always nothing. Then the sounds became more frequent. Footsteps. Light, quick footsteps that would stop the second I did. I'd be walking, hear the faint crunch of gravel behind me. I'd freeze, and the sound would disappear. It was like a cruel game of cat and mouse, and I was definitely the mouse. One night, I was near the northern edge of the graveyard, by the old iron fence that bordered the woods. It was a particularly dark night, with no moon and heavy clouds. I was doing my fence check, running my hand along the cold metal railing, when I heard it. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. It was faint, ragged breathing, coming from just beyond the fence line, in the darkness of the woods. I froze, my hand still gripping the iron railing. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of someone trying to breathe quietly, trying not to be heard. I slowly, carefully, turned my flashlight towards the sound. The beam shot into the D-E-N-S-E Chinese letter stands beyond the fence, illuminating a wall of leaves and branches. I swept the light back and forth, my hand shaking. Nothing, just trees, but I could still hear the breathing, faint, but definitely there. It was coming from somewhere in the darkness, just out of sight. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, flashlight beam trembling, straining to see something, anything in the woods. The breathing continued, a soft, horrible counterpoint to the silence of the graveyard. And then it stopped, abruptly, like whoever was there had suddenly held their breath. Silence that followed was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, filled with unspoken threat. I felt completely, utterly exposed. I knew with a sickening certainty that someone was out there, watching me, and they were close. I backed away from the fence, my eyes still glued to the tree line. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back to the safety of the office, to call the police. But my feet felt rooted to the spot. Something held me there, a morbid curiosity mixed with sheer, paralyzing fear. I stayed there for another 10 minutes, maybe more, listening, watching. There was no more breathing, no more sound from the woods. But the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. If anything, it was stronger now. It felt like eyes were boring into my back, following my every move. Finally, the adrenaline won out. I turned and practically ran back towards the main section of the graveyard, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly in front of me. I didn't stop running until I reached the office, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I slammed the door shut behind me, fumbling with the lock, my hands still shaking. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, trying to calm myself down. What the hell was going on? It wasn't just my imagination anymore. There was someone out there, someone who was deliberately trying to scare me, or worse. I spent the rest of that night huddled in the office, the lights on, the door locked. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see a face peering in. Every creak of the old building made me jump. I didn't dare go back out for the rest of my shift. The next morning, I considered quitting. Seriously considered it. But then I thought about the money. I needed this job. And maybe, just maybe, it was still just some jerk messing with me, trying to drive me away. If I quit now, they'd win. So I went back. I told myself I was being brave. In reality, I was being stupid or desperate or a little bit of both. The nights that followed were a blur of fear and hypervigilance. The scratching on the mausoleum returned. The footsteps behind me became a regular occurrence. The breathing in the woods resurfaced, sometimes close, sometimes further away. It was like this person, whoever they were, was playing with me, testing me, pushing my limits. I started carrying a large wrench in my pocket, just in case. It wasn't much, but it made me feel slightly less vulnerable. I also started varying my patrol route, trying to be unpredictable. But it didn't seem to matter. Wherever I went, it felt like this presence was never far behind. One night, I was in the newer section of the graveyard, near the entrance. It was a clear night, with a sliver of moon providing some faint light. I was walking along a path when I heard it. Not footsteps this time, but a faint, low sound, like someone was humming. It was eerie, because no one should be humming in a graveyard at 2 a.m., especially not that deep, almost guttural hum. It sounded wrong. I stopped dead in my tracks, listening. The hum was coming from behind a large cluster of spruce trees nearby. I slowly, cautiously, moved towards the trees, my flashlight off. I held my breath, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. As I got closer, the humming got slightly louder. It was a simple, repetitive tune, but it was off-key and sounded distorted, like it was being sung by someone who wasn't quite human. I reached the edge of the trees, peering into the darkness. I couldn't see anything, but the humming was definitely coming from the other side of the trees. Taking a deep breath, I slowly rounded the trees, flashlight still off. And that's when I saw them. 2 figures. They were standing amongst the tombstones, maybe 50 feet away. One was tall and thin, the other slightly shorter. They were both facing away from me, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. The taller one was the one doing the humming. My body locked up. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I just stood there, hidden by the trees, watching them. They weren't doing anything, just standing there, facing the darkness, the tall one humming that horrible tune. They looked like they were just waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in fear. Minutes felt like hours. The humming continued, a constant, unnerving sound in the quiet graveyard. Finally, the shorter figure raised their arm and pointed, not at me, but towards the back of the graveyard, towards the woods. The taller one stopped humming, and slowly, deliberately, they both turned. They turned towards the trees, towards where I was standing. And that's when I got a glimpse of their faces, or rather, what I could see of them in the dim light. They were pale, unnaturally pale, and their eyes seemed to reflect the faint moonlight with an unnatural intensity. They were looking right at me. Panic finally broke through my paralysis. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran. I sprinted back the way I came, crashing through the trees and bushes, not caring about the noise I was making. My only thought was to get away, to get back to the office, to safety. I could hear sounds behind me now, not footsteps, but something else. A rustling, a cracking of branches, like something was moving quickly through the undergrowth. It sounded unnatural, too fast, too agile. I didn't look back. I just ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. I burst out of the trees and onto the main path, still running as fast as I could towards the office. The sounds behind me seemed to stop once I was on the open path. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder. Nothing. The path behind me was empty, but the feeling of being watched was back, stronger than ever. It felt like they were just at the edge of the darkness, silently observing me. I reached the office, fumbling with the key, my hands trembling so hard I could barely get it into the lock. I finally got the door open and scrambled inside, slamming it shut and locking it instantly. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face from the sheer terror. had seen them. They were real, and they had seen me. That night was the worst. I stayed in the office, the lights on, trembling. I kept hearing noises outside, faint taps on the windows, scrapes against the walls. A low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was like they were circling the office, playing with me, letting me know they were there. I didn't sleep a wink. I just sat there, clutching the wrench, listening to the horrifying symphony of sounds outside, waiting for something to happen. But nothing ever did. They just stayed outside, watching, waiting. When the sun finally started to rise, the sound stopped. The feeling of being watched slowly dissipated. As the first rays of light crept over the horizon, a sense of relief washed over me so intense it made me feel weak. They were gone. For now. I called my boss that morning and told him I was quitting. I didn't give him a reason. I didn't tell him about the scratching, the footsteps, the breathing, or the two figures. He would have thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But I knew what I had seen, what I had heard, what I had felt. I packed my things that day and left town. I didn't even wait for my last paycheck. I just needed to get away from that place, from that feeling, from whatever was out there in the darkness. I've never told this story to anyone before. How do you explain to someone that you were stalked by something not quite human in a graveyard? They'd lock you up. But I still think about it every night. When the sun goes down, a cold knot of fear tightens in my stomach. I still feel like I'm being watched sometimes, even now, miles away from that place. A quick glance over my shoulder, a sudden jump at a sound in the night. I don't know what those things were, or if they were even human. All I know is that they were real, and they were in that graveyard, and for weeks, they were watching me, playing with me. I'm lucky I got out when I did. I honestly think if I had stayed another night, I wouldn't be here to tell you about it. So yeah, night shift at the graveyard. Sounds like an easy gig, right? Just be careful what you sign up for. You never know who or what might be watching from the shadows. And sometimes, the dead aren't the ones you need to be afraid of. It's the ones who wander in the darkness, who shouldn't be there at all, who have eyes that reflect the moonlight and a hum that chills you to the bone. They're the ones you need to fear, because they might just be waiting for you, waiting to join their ranks. And I don't think they'll let you go easily. Consider yourself warned. All right, let's pick up where I left off, shall we? After that terrifying night huddled in the office, listening to whatever was out there, I actually slept. Hard, not a peaceful sleep, mind you. It was full of nightmares, flashes of those pale, unnatural faces in the moonlight, the sound of that off-key hum echoing in my ears. But I slept, and when I woke up, the sun was shining. Birds were chirping outside, and for a few blessed moments, it felt like it had all been a bad dream. But then the memories came rushing back. The scratch marks, the footsteps, the breathing in the woods, the two figures. It was all real. And the fear came back with it, a cold, heavy weight in my stomach. Like I said, I called my boss and quit. No 2 weeks notice, no explanation. Just, I quit. He sounded annoyed, but I didn't care. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was worth staying in that place another night. I went straight home, packed a bag with the essentials, and just drove. I didn't know where I was going, just as far away from that graveyard as I could get. Every mile felt like an escape. Every rearview mirror check was a moment of panic, expecting to see those two figures following me, somehow keeping pace. I drove for hours until the sun started to dip below the horizon. I found a cheap motel in a town I'd never heard of, miles and miles away from the graveyard. I locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and tried to convince myself I was safe. But the fear didn't go away. It was like it had followed me, settled in the room with me. Every creak of the pipes, every car passing on the road outside, made me jump. I kept looking at the windows, the shadows in the corners of the room, half expecting to see those pale faces again. That night was almost as bad as the one in the office. I didn't really sleep. I just lay there, heart pounding, listening to the silence, or the not quite silence, of the motel room. Every now and then, I'd hear a sound outside that sounded familiar, like a light tap on the window or a faint scraping sound. I'd tell myself it was just the wind or the building settling or another guest in the room next door. But deep down, I knew. Or I was terrified that I knew. I spent the next few days in a haze of fear and exhaustion. I was constantly on edge, always looking over my shoulder. I tried to figure out what I had seen. Were they people, some kind of cult, or something else? I kept going back to the way they looked, the unnatural paleness of their skin, the way their eyes seemed to reflect the moonlight. And that humming, that horrible, off-key hum, it had felt wrong, like it wasn't meant to be heard by human ears. I avoided anything to do with graveyards, obviously. I couldn't even look at one on TV or in a movie without feeling that cold dread creep in. I tried to distract myself, to do normal things. I'd go for walks, try to read a book, anything to keep my mind from replaying the events of those nights. But it didn't work. The memories were too vivid, too terrifying. And the feeling of being watched, it never truly left me. It was like a shadow that followed me everywhere, just at the periphery of my vision. As the weeks turned into months, the intensity of the fear lessened slightly. I started to sleep a little better, to feel a little more grounded. I tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, I had imagined some of it, or that it was just some really messed up prank that had escalated. But then, things started happening again. Little things at first. Unexplained noises outside my apartment at night. Footsteps in the hallway that no one else seemed to hear. The feeling of someone standing just outside my door. I moved to a new state, hoping to escape whatever it was I had encountered. I got a new job, a different life. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the lingering effects of the trauma. But the little things kept happening. My car would be parked one way in the morning and slightly shifted when I came back. Objects in my apartment would be moved just a few inches, enough to make me doubt my sanity. I'd find small, faint scratches on my door frame, like something sharp had been dragged across the wood. They looked vaguely familiar, too similar to the scratch marks I had seen on the mausoleum. The fear started to creep back in, slowly at first, then with a vengeance. I'd be at work, out with friends, and I'd feel that familiar prickle on the back of my neck. I'd look over my shoulder, my heart pounding, expecting to see those pale faces in the crowd. One night, I was home alone, watching TV. It was late, and the apartment was quiet. Suddenly, I heard a sound from outside my window. A light, rhythmic tapping. My blood ran cold. It sounded exactly like the scraping I had heard at the graveyard. I froze, listening. The tapping continued, faint but persistent. It was coming from just outside my bedroom window, which was on the second floor. Who would be tapping on my second-story window in the middle of the night? I slowly, cautiously, got up from the couch. Every muscle in my body was tense. I crept towards the bedroom, trying to be as quiet as possible. The tapping stopped as I got closer, just like in the graveyard. I reached the bedroom door and paused, listening intently. Silence. Complete, utter silence. I stood there for a long moment, straining to hear anything. Had I imagined it? Was I finally losing my mind? Then, softly, the tapping started again. This time, it was on the glass of the window. My breath hitched in my throat. I slowly edged closer to the corner of the window, trying to get a look without being seen. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I peered around the edge of the curtain, my eyes scanning the darkness outside. I didn't see anything at first, just the empty night. Then I saw it. A figure. It was tall and thin, standing just below my window. It was facing upwards towards my window. I couldn't see its face clearly in the darkness, but I could see its outline. And it was wrong. Too tall, too angular. It didn't look like a normal person, and it was tapping on the window, not with a hand, but with something long and thin. I couldn't tell what it was in the darkness. I pulled back from the window, my hand clamped over my mouth to stifle a scream. My body was trembling uncontrollably. They had found me. They had followed me all this way. The tapping stopped again. And then I heard a different sound, a low, guttural hum. It was that hum, that awful, distorted humming I had heard in the graveyard. It was faint, but it was definitely coming from outside. They were here. One of them was right outside my window, humming that terrifying tune. I backed away from the window, my eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape, a weapon, anything. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a large, framed picture, and held it in front of me, like it would offer any protection against whatever was out there. I stayed in the middle of the room, far away from the window, listening to the silence. The humming had stopped. The tapping had stopped. But I knew they were still there, waiting. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there in the darkness, clutching the picture frame, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Time stretched on. Minutes felt like hours. I didn't dare move. I kept listening, my ears strained, trying to pick up any sound from outside. Eventually, the fear started to give way to a desperate need to know, to see. I had to know if they were still there. Slowly, cautiously, I crept back towards the window. I edged my head around the curtain again, my eyes scanning the area below. Nothing. The figure was gone. The area below my window was empty. I stayed there for a long time, watching the darkness, listening. There were no more sounds, no more tapping, no more humming, just the normal night noises. But the feeling of being watched was back, stronger than ever. It felt like they were still out there, hiding in the shadows, just beyond my sight. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in the living room, the lights on, a knife from the kitchen on the coffee table in front of me. Every little sound sent a jolt of fear through me. The next morning, I called the police. I tried to explain what had happened about the tapping, the humming, the figure outside my window. They listened politely, took down my information, and said they'd keep an eye on the area. But I could tell they didn't believe me. How could they? It sounded crazy. Tapping on a second-story window, a distorted hum, a figure that looked wrong. I didn't mention the graveyard. I didn't mention the scratch marks. I knew they'd just dismiss me as a lunatic. After that night, I became a prisoner in my own apartment. I barely left my apartment during the day, and I certainly didn't go out at night. I had the curtains drawn constantly, even during the day. Every shadow, every sound sent me into a fresh wave of panic. The little things continued. More faint scratches on my door. Objects in my apartment subtly rearranged. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear it. The faint, low hum. It would come from outside my apartment, from the street, from the hallway. It was always faint, always just on the edge of hearing, but it was always there. A chilling reminder that they hadn't gone away. They were still here, still watching. I started losing weight. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The constant fear was eating away at me. I was a wreck. I knew I couldn't live like this. I had to do something. But what? The police weren't taking me seriously. I couldn't explain it to anyone without sounding completely insane. I thought about going back to the graveyard, back to where it had started. Maybe there were answers there. Maybe I could find out what those things were, what they wanted. But the thought terrified me. Going back to that place felt like walking into the lion's den. It felt like giving them what they wanted. So I stayed put. I tried to build a fortress around myself. I installed extra locks on my door and windows. I bought a security camera for my front door, hoping it would catch them if they showed up again. The camera didn't catch them. Not the figures anyway. But one night, it did catch something. I was watching the live feed on my phone like I did constantly. It was late. Everything was quiet. Suddenly, I saw it, a shadow, moving across my front door. It was long and distorted, not like a normal human shadow. It lingered for a few seconds, then disappeared. My blood ran cold. I rewound the footage and watched it again. Yes, a shadow, a strange, elongated shadow. Was that one of them? Were they so close? I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no sound at all. Just the silent movement of that shadow. After that, I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. It didn't matter how many locks I had, how many cameras I installed. They could get to me. Or they were letting me know they could get to me anytime they wanted. I sold everything I owned that I couldn't fit into my car. I didn't have much anyway. Most of my possessions felt tainted by the fear, by the feeling of being watched. I left in the middle of the night without telling anyone. I drove for hours again, just like the first time. This time, I went even further. I drove until I reached the coast, the furthest point I could get from that inland graveyard. I found a small town, a quiet place. I rented a small cottage by the ocean. The sound of the waves was a constant comfort, a white noise that drowned out the silence and the fear. For a while, it was better. I still had the lingering anxiety, the quick glances over my shoulder, but the intense, suffocating fear started to fade again. Maybe, I thought, maybe I had finally outrun them. But you can't outrun your own mind, can you? And you can't outrun the things that haunt you. One day, I was walking along the beach at sunset. The sky was a beautiful mix of pinks and oranges. The waves were crashing against the shore. It was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something approaching normal. And then I saw it. Just a single black feather lying on the sand. It might seem like nothing, just a feather. But there was something about it that caught my eye. It was too perfect, too dark, and it felt out of place on the beach. As I looked at it, a sense of dread washed over me. I didn't know why. It was just a feather. But as I crouched down to pick it up, I noticed something else. Faintly etched asterisk onto the feather, barely visible, were tiny, intricate lines. They looked like symbols, or perhaps letters. My hands started to tremble. I dropped the feather as if it had burned me. I stood up slowly, my eyes scanning the beach, the dunes, the sky. Nothing. No one, just the waves and the wind. But the feeling was back. The cold, heavy weight in my stomach. The prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The undeniable certainty that I was being watched. I knew then that it wasn't over. They hadn't given up. They hadn't forgotten about me. They had followed me to the coast. How? How had they found me? I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I had cut off all contact with my old life. Unless they didn't need to be told. Unless they just knew. That night was a nightmare. I didn't sleep. I just sat by the window, looking out at the dark ocean, listening to the waves. Every time a wave crashed, it sounded like something else. Like footsteps on gravel, like scratching on stone, like that low, guttural hum. I knew they were out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. I don't know what they are, or why they are doing this to me. All I know is that they seem determined to make my life a living hell. They follow me, they watch me, they leave these little, terrifying signs to let me know they are still there. It's been years since I left the graveyard. Years of living with this fear, this constant, gnawing anxiety. Years of looking over my shoulder, of jumping at every sound. I've considered going back, facing them, demanding to know what they want. But the fear is too strong. The memory of those pale faces, those unnatural eyes, that chilling hum, it paralyses me. Sometimes I think about giving up, letting them find me. What would happen then? I don't know. But maybe it would be better than living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, constantly afraid. But another part of me refuses to surrender. I won't let them win. I won't let them take my life from me, even if they've already taken my peace of mind. I still live by the ocean. I still try to live a normal life, but the fear is always present. A low hum beneath the surface of everything. I still find the occasional misplaced object, the faint scratch marks, the unsettling silence followed by the inexplicable sound of that distant humming. I'm always watchful now, always listening, always waiting. I don't know if they're real people experimenting on me, some kind of strange stalkers, or something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. All I know is that they started in that graveyard, in the darkness, among the dead. And they have been with me ever since. A constant, terrifying reminder that some things, once awakened, never go back to sleep. And sometimes, the real monsters aren't the ones buried in the earth. They're the ones who walk among us, unseen, unheard, until they decide to let you know they're there. And once they do, they might never leave. All right, so after that whole, whatever it was on the beach, with that feather and the symbols, I knew I couldn't stay there either. It was just another reminder that running wasn't working. They were finding me. Every time I thought I was safe, they'd leave some little breadcrumb, some creepy sign, to let me know they were still there. It felt like a game to them. A sick, twisted hunt, and I was the prey. Moving again was even harder this time. The first few times, there was a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe this new place, this new life, would be different. But now, it was just a desperate, exhausting exercise. I packed up what little I had left, most of my belongings still feeling somehow tainted, and I hit the road again. This time, I didn't go for distance as much as I went for isolation. I found a small cabin out in the middle of nowhere. Woods all around, no close neighbors, the kind of place where you could disappear. I figured maybe, just maybe, if I was far enough off the beaten path, they wouldn't be able to find me. Or maybe it would be harder for them, at least. The first few weeks were quiet, almost unnervingly quiet. Just the sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the calls of birds, the wind whistling through the trees. No car engines, no distant voices, nothing but nature. Part of me felt a sense of peace, a fragile hope that perhaps I had finally found a place where they couldn't reach me. But the other part, the part that had been living in fear for so long, was constantly on high alert. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I spent a lot of time looking out the windows, watching the tree line. It felt like the woods were watching me back, like eyes were hidden amongst the leaves, just out of sight. I'd sweep my gaze across the dense foliage, my heart pounding, convinced I would see those pale faces peering out at me. But I never did. Not at first, anyway. I tried to create a routine to make the cabin feel like home. I gardened, I hiked the trails nearby, I tried to read, but it was hard to focus the constant undercurrent of anxiety. I felt like I was waiting for something, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for them to show up. And then it started again. Small things, just like before. A branch that looked like it had been deliberately broken on the path outside my cabin. A stone that wasn't there the day before, placed strategically on my doorstep. Little things that most people wouldn't notice, that I could try to rationalize as just nature. But I knew it wasn't just nature. It was them, letting me know they were still here, still watching. The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just in the woods anymore. It felt like it was coming from inside the asterisk cabin, like they were in the walls, in the attic, somewhere just out of sight, observing my every move. I'd be sitting in the living room, and I'd suddenly feel a cold spot or a gust of wind that shouldn't be there, and I'd spin around, expecting to see them standing behind me. Sometimes, I'd hear faint noises at night, scratching in the walls, like something trying to get in. Soft footsteps on the roof. A low, almost inaudible whisper that seemed to slither in through the cracks in the floorboards. I'd lie awake in bed, my heart pounding, straining to hear over the sound of my own breathing. One night, I was in the kitchen, getting a glass of water. It was late, and the cabin was silent. As I reached for the faucet, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tap, tap, tapping. It was coming from outside, from the window above the sink. My hand froze on the faucet. My blood ran cold. It was the same tapping I had heard at my apartment, the same sound from the graveyard. Slowly, cautiously, I turned my head towards the window. It was dark outside, the glass reflecting my own terrified face back at me. The tapping continued, soft but persistent. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from just beyond the glass, maybe a foot or two away. I stood there, frozen, my breath held in my lungs. Who would be tapping on my kitchen window in the middle of the night, miles from anywhere, unless the tapping stopped, abruptly, just like before. Then I heard a different sound, a low, distorted hum. My stomach lurched. That hum, the graveyard hum. It was fainter this time, almost swallowed by the silence of the woods, but it was definitely there. It was coming from just outside the window. They were here, at the cabin. They had found me again. Panic set in, a cold, paralyzing wave. I backed away from the window, my eyes glued to the pane of glass, half expecting to see a pale face pressed against it. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely stand. I didn't dare turn on the lights. I just stood there in the darkness of the kitchen, listening. The humming continued for a few moments, that awful, off-key tune, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was just as terrifying as the sound. I stayed in the kitchen for what felt like hours, huddled in the corner, a heavy frying pan clutched in my hand. I listened intently, straining to hear any more sounds from outside. Nothing, just the normal night sounds of the woods. But I knew they were out there. I knew they were close. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the living room, the curtains drawn tight, a knife on the table in front of me, listening to every creak and groan of the old cabin. Every rustle in the woods outside sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like a whispered voice. It felt like the cabin itself was holding its breath, waiting. In the morning, with the sun finally breaking through the trees, the intense fear subsided slightly. But it was replaced by a deep, bone-tired exhaustion and a fresh wave of despair. There was no escape. No matter how far I ran, they would find me. I started installing more security measures. I reinforced the doors and windows. I bought outdoor motion sensor lights. I even considered getting a dog, but I was afraid of what they might do to it. The little things continued, spaced out enough to make me doubt my sanity, but too consistent to ignore. A small pile of stones strategically placed near the back door. A single, dark feather left on my porch swing. Faint, almost imperceptible scratches on the wooden railing of my deck, and the feeling of being watched. It was constant now, a heavy presence that never seemed to leave. I felt like I was living under a microscope, every move observed, every action judged. One afternoon, I was out hiking on one of the trails near my cabin. It was a beautiful day, sunny and warm. I was trying to clear my head, to feel normal for a little while. I was walking along a narrow path, the trees dense on either side, when I heard it. Footsteps. Light, quick footsteps coming from behind me. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped the moment I did. I slowly, cautiously turned around. My eyes scanned the path behind me, peering into the shadows of the trees. Nothing, just the empty trail. I stood there for a long moment, straining to hear anything over the pounding of my own heart. Had I imagined it? Was it just an animal? A deer, maybe? Then I heard it again. Footsteps. This time lighter, softer, but definitely there. And they were keeping pace with my breathing. It was like they were mimicking me. I started walking again, slowly at first, and the footsteps started too, keeping pace with mine, a few yards behind me. My pace quickened. The footsteps quickened with me. I started to run. Flat out sprint, pushing through the trees, not caring about the branches slapping my face. And the sounds behind me increased, a rustling, a cracking of branches, something moving inhumanly fast through the woods. It wasn't footsteps anymore. It was something else. A slithering, a scraping, like something large and heavy, was being dragged through the undergrowth. I burst out of the tree line and onto a wider path, still running, panting for breath. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder. Nothing. The path behind me was empty, but I could still hear it. The rustling, the scraping, just at the edge of the tree line. It sounded like it was moving parallel to me, keeping pace. I ran all the way back to the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me, fumbling with the locks. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. They had followed me onto the trail. They were out there in the woods, watching me, playing with me. After that, I barely left the cabin. My world shrank to the four walls of that small building. I had food delivered. I did everything online. I was a prisoner in my own home, surrounded by the vast, dark woods that felt like they were teeming with unseen eyes. The noises continued. Scratching in the walls, footsteps on the roof, that faint, chilling hum from outside. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, guttural growl. It sounded like it was coming from the basement or from underneath the cabin. A deep, animalistic sound, but wrong. Not like any animal I knew. I didn't dare go down into the basement. I just stayed upstairs, huddled in the living room, listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. One night, I was sitting in the living room, the lights on, the curtains drawn. I was trying to watch TV, but I couldn't focus. The feeling of being watched was too intense. It felt like they were right outside the windows, pressing against the glass, their pale faces inches away. Suddenly, all the lights in the cabin flickered and went out. Complete darkness. My breath hitched in my throat. The cabin was plunged into inky blackness. The only sound was the pounding of my own heart in my ears. And then I heard it, right outside the front door, a low, distorted hum, louder than I had ever heard it before. It wasn't faint anymore. It was loud, resonant, filling the silence. And it was joined by another sound, a light, rhythmic scratching on the front door. They were outside, right outside the door, my body locked up. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just sat there in the darkness, listening to that horrifying symphony of sounds just inches away from me. The humming, the scratching, it felt like they were trying to get in. The scratching stopped. The humming stopped. Silence. And then I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible whisper. It sounded like it was coming from the other side of the door. I couldn't make out the words. It was too faint, too distorted. It sounded like muttering, in a language I didn't understand. The whispering continued for a few moments, and then it stopped. Silence returned. A heavy, oppressive silence that felt like it was pressing down on me. I stayed there in the darkness, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. I was convinced that if I did, they would hear me. They would know I was there. After what felt like an age, the lights flickered back on. I blinked against the sudden brightness, my eyes adjusting. I slowly got up from the couch, my legs trembling. I crept towards the front door, my heart pounding. I reached the door and paused, listening. Nothing, just the normal sounds of the cabin. Taking a deep breath, I turned the doorknob and slowly, cautiously opened the door. I peered out into the darkness. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. Just the trees, silent and dark. But on the wood of the door, at eye level, I saw them. Fresh scratch marks. Deeper, more intricate than any I had seen before. They were still there, proof that it hadn't been a dream. And they looked like letters or symbols, arranged in some kind of pattern. I didn't understand them, but I knew what they meant, a message from them. I backed away from the door, my hand pressed against my mouth, stifling a sob. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were communicating, and they were getting closer. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. There was nowhere left to run. They had found me in the city. They had found me by the ocean. And now they had found me in the middle of the woods. I called the police again. I told them about the power outage, the sounds at the door, the scratch marks. They sent an officer out. He looked around, shined his flashlight around the yard, shrugged, and said it was probably just an animal. He looked at the scratch marks on the door and said it might be teenagers. Teenagers, out here, in the middle of the night. I knew he didn't believe me, just like everyone else. I was on my own, completely, utterly on my own. The fear transformed into something else after that night. It became a cold, simmering rage. I was tired of being scared, tired of running, tired of being hunted. I started researching. I spent hours online, searching for anything that might explain what I was experiencing. Strange occurrences, unexplained phenomena, cryptids, folklore, urban legends. I looked into everything I could find. Most of it was useless, just stories and speculation. But then I stumbled across something that sent a shiver down my spine. Old article, buried deep in a local historical society's online archives, mentioning strange occurrences in the area around that graveyard, mentioning disappearances, unexplained noises at night, locals who spoke of figures that were not quite right, seen wandering in the woods, especially near the old cemetery. It was just a few paragraphs, a fleeting mention in a larger article about the town's history. But it felt like a confirmation. I wasn't crazy. Other people had seen things too. The article didn't offer any explanations, any names, any details about what these figures were, but it was enough to give me a sense of purpose. I had to find out more. I had to understand what I was up against. I knew what I had to do. It was terrifying, but I knew it was the only way. I had to go back to the graveyard, the place where it had all started. The thought filled me with a sickening dread. Going back to that place felt like walking into my own grave, but I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't live in constant fear, constantly running, constantly wondering what they were, what they wanted, and when they would finally catch me. I needed answers, and I felt with a chilling certainty that the answers were in that graveyard. I started planning. I gathered supplies, a strong flashlight, a first aid kit, food, water, and something to defend myself with, just in case. I didn't know what I would do if I encountered them again, but I wasn't going to be completely defenseless. The drive back to my old town felt surreal. Every mile brought me closer to that place, closer to the source of my terror. The closer I got, the more the fear intensified, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. When I finally arrived, I didn't go straight to the graveyard. I got a motel room on the edge of town, a place with exterior doors so I could park my car right outside. I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. I was scared, more scared than I had ever been, but I was also driven by a desperate need for answers. I spent the next day just being there, walking around the town. It had changed a little, but the core of it was the same. And in the distance, I could see the tree line that marked the edge of the graveyard. It looked peaceful in the daylight, just a patch of woods and rolling hills. But I knew what was hidden within its borders. I waited until nightfall. The air grew cold, the light faded, and the familiar sense of dread settled over me. I put on dark clothes, packed my bag, checked my makeshift weapon, a sturdy crowbar I had bought earlier that day. It wasn't much, but it felt better than nothing. Getting into the graveyard wasn't hard. The main gates were still locked, but there was a section of the old iron fence on the north side that was damaged, sagging and easy to slip through. The same section near the woods where I had first heard the breathing. As I stepped onto the hallowed ground, a wave of cold washed over me that had nothing to do with the temperature. The air felt heavy still. The silence was profound, broken only by the sounds of my own breathing and the crunch of gravel under my feet. I pulled out my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on immediately. I wanted to let my eyes adjust to the darkness, to see if I could sense anything at all. The old feeling of being watched returned immediately. It was like a switch had been flipped. It was stronger here, more palpable. Like the air itself was thick with unseen eyes. I started walking slowly, quietly, moving deeper into the graveyard. I stayed off the main paths, sticking to the shadows between the tombstones and mausoleums. Every step felt amplified in the silence. Every rustle of leaves sounded like someone nearby. I made my way towards the Civil War section, the oldest part of the graveyard, the place where I had first seen the scratch marks on the mausoleum. The air grew colder as I approached, the shadows deeper. The ancient oaks seemed to twist and writhe in the darkness, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out. As I got closer to the mausoleum, my heart started to pound. I could almost feel the chilling presence that had been there before, lingering in the air. I reached the large stone structure and slowly raised my flashlight. I hesitated for a moment, my hand trembling. What if they were there? What if they were waiting for me? Taking a deep breath, I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the inky blackness, illuminating the front of the mausoleum. I swept the light across the weathered stone, looking for the scratch marks. They were still there, fainter now, but definitely visible. The same faint symbols, the same unnatural lines. I moved closer, focusing my flashlight on the marks. I tried to make sense of them, to see if they formed any recognizable pattern or letters. And then, as I was examining the scratches, I heard it. A faint sound coming from behind the mausoleum. A low, distorted hum. My blood ran cold. It was that asterisk hum, the graveyard hum, and it was coming from just a few yards away. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling on the stone. My eyes darted towards the back of the mausoleum, peering into the darkness. Silence. The humming had stopped the moment I heard it, just like before. Always just out of sight, always stopping when I perceived them. My mind raced. Were they there, right behind the mausoleum, waiting for me? The cold rage that had been simmering inside me flared up. I was tired of this, tired of the fear, tired of the games. I slowly, deliberately rounded the corner of the mausoleum, my crowbar raised, my flashlight beam sweeping the area. And that's when I saw him. Just one figure this time, standing maybe 20 feet away amongst the tombstones. He was tall and thin, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. He was facing away from me, looking out into the darkness. My breath hitched in my throat. It was one of them. One of the figures from the graveyard, from my apartment window, from the woods. He wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to disappear back into the darkness. But I held my ground. I had come back for answers. I slowly raised my flashlight, my hand shaking. I pointed the beam at the figure. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating him. And that's when I saw his face. Or rather, what I could see of it. It was pale, unnaturally pale, almost translucent in the flashlight beam. His eyes were dark, sunken, and seemed to reflect the light with an eerie intensity. But the most disturbing thing, his features were blurred, indistinct, like looking at something underwater or through warped glass. He didn't react to the light. He didn't move. He just stood there, facing away from me, his head slightly tilted. And then I heard it again. A soft, almost inaudible whisper. It was coming from him. Was whispering something. A low, guttural sound, in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't human. It sounded like dry leaves rustling or stones grinding together. The whispering continued for a few moments, and then it stopped. He slowly turned his head, his face still indistinct in the light, and he looked right at me. I couldn't see his eyes clearly, but I felt the weight of his gaze, and a wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me, stronger than anything I had felt before. I knew with a chilling certainty that I had made a terrible mistake coming back here. His head tilted further, a slow, unnatural movement, and then he raised one hand. It wasn't a normal hand. His fingers were too long, too thin, ending in what looked like sharp black claws. He lifted his hand and slowly, deliberately pointed, not at me, but past me, towards the darkness behind me. My blood ran cold. I didn't dare turn around, but I knew. I knew there was something there, something else. A low, distorted hum started again, coming from the darkness behind me. And this time, it wasn't faint. It was loud, close. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran. I dropped the crowbar. I dropped the flashlight. I just ran. Sprinting blindly through the darkness of the graveyard, not caring where I was going, my only thought to get away from that figure, away from that hum, away from whatever was behind me. I could hear sounds behind me again. Not footsteps, but that same awful slithering, scraping sound I had heard in the woods near my cabin. And the humming. It was following me, closing in. I ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I tore through the darkness, tripping over unseen obstacles, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, fueled by pure, primal terror, until I burst out of the graveyard and onto the street, not stopping until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so hard I could barely get them into the ignition. I started the engine, slammed the car into reverse, and sped away from that place, tires squealing, not looking back. I drove for hours, just like the first time and the second time. Just driving, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that graveyard, between myself and whatever was lurking within its borders. I didn't stop driving until the sun was coming up, and I was miles and miles away. I pulled over at a rest stop, my body trembling, my mind reeling. I had gone back for answers, and all I had found was more terror. I had confirmed that they were real, that they were here, and that they were still interested in me. I still don't know what they are, or why they are doing this, but I know with absolute certainty that I am being hunted, and I don't think they will ever stop. I'm not in that town anymore. I'm not in the cabin in the woods. I'm somewhere else now. Somewhere I don't think they can find me, but the fear is still here. The feeling of being watched is still here. Every shadow, every sound, every misplaced object is a reminder that they could be close, waiting. I don't sleep much these days. I'm always on edge, always listening, always waiting. I learned a terrible lesson working the night shift at that graveyard. Some things are better left undisturbed. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And some entities, once they see you, never let you go. I don't know what my future holds. I don't know how long I can live like this in constant fear. But I know one thing for sure. I am lucky to be alive, so far. And I have a feeling, a cold, chilling feeling, that the hunt isn't over. Not by a long shot.